This presentation is going to be packed full of data. You'll get the decks later, so I recognize this is a class setting. You guys are trying to learn, so I'm going to breeze through the deck, but I have real world experience, so if you got questions, pop up, ask, you know what I mean? Like, this is kind of a open-ended. The presentation kind of drives the conversation, but really it's trying to get you the information that you need. So if you have questions, stop me, raise your hand or whatever. A little bit about my background. I, oddly enough, started in retail sales when I was 20. You know what I mean? Like, left college, like, all right. I think Jackie and I kind of bumped into each other. We knew each other from high school, but I was at Rent-A-Center and got pissed off at my boss one day and decided, you know what, I'm going to do sales. Went from sales into project management. Went from project management into director of project management. And then went from there to became a strategy officer at a small IT firm. From that to a product owner. From that to executive vice president. And I've held 4 VP roles since my early 30s. I am much older than I look. I think at one point, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I just decided, I've been building companies my entire career. I want to kind of do my own thing. And so Ytechnology was born. What you're going to see here is the easiest way to understand what we do is basically project management or product management. I'm sorry. What you're going to learn mostly is that a lot of the information that you're reading academically and a lot of stuff that you're seeing on websites overlapped. There's these circles, right? And everybody's calling their own language. Everyone's kind of referring to these things in the same way. But there's a basic approach of what works and what often fails. What I'm going to show you is what works, right? And it is not going to be something that makes you happy. It is a lot more work than what you're accustomed to thinking about. What I've seen in my career, what happens most when companies are failing is ego. People start out, I have an idea because I have an idea. You hear that word I. My idea is awesome. It's going to be great. You go talk to your mom about it. Your mom tells you it's awesome. Your friends tell you it's awesome. You haven't done any work on it. And then, it fails and you don't really understand why. The reason it failed is because you didn't do the right work, right? And that's what we're going to kind of walk through. All right. So when I thought through this, it was, all right, well, what do these guys need to know? Need to learn more about customer development. That is a word that I don't know your curriculum, but I know it took me maybe 6 years in the space of building crap from an engineering side to realize that I didn't know this side of it, which was the customer development side. It is the most important piece. And I don't know the makeup of engineers versus business people in here, but I can tell you engineers are awesome at building, but never do customer development. They don't want to talk to customers. From a philosophy perspective, and it's really kind of designed this way, if I give an engineer a problem, their job is to solve that problem and give me an application back. Their job is typically not to go figure out why I need to solve that problem. What context is that problem in? Why do you need that solved? What's the impact of your business? They're never going to ask that question. They want a user story. You need a feature that does this, and here's the output. Done. So what that kind of builds is blinders if you're a developer, but it also will create situations, especially if you're working inside an organization, that they're what we call silos. And those silos are information silos. It's, I know this, here's my expertise, this is what I'm good at. I'm not necessarily stepping inside of it. That's somebody else's job. And you'll see this all through corporate America. Everything is someone else's job. What I want to kind of show you today is the important piece is that regardless of what roles you're playing, you'll know how these pieces work together. And in some cases, if you're a founder, you end up wearing all of these hats, like you're doing all these roles. All right, so basically I wanted to paint this as a scenario, a story, right? The key deal here is you're a product manager. Your life is kind of cool. You come in, sip some coffee, chat with your friends, send some emails, follow up and figure out what the developers have done that day. You take a look at your app, see if it's sucking or if they created the right feature and the feature works. It's pretty easy life. And then, business happens. The CEO gives you a call and he's like, all right, well, this whole thing isn't going as well as we thought it was going, right? Like the investors want more money. We need this thing to grow. The product that we have now is getting slow. I need you to build something awesome. And you have no idea what that is, right? All right, so let's talk about your role as a product manager. You're going to hear product owner in this space. You're going to hear product manager. You're going to hear UX designer. Again, a lot of these words kind of overlap. I don't know if there's just a fight for titles in corporate America, but the roles and responsibilities overlap so much. But when you hear the phrase product manager, really that is a person that is the central location for the strategy component of what you're doing. You know, it's who's talking to the customer. The way I've always explained it to my new hire or new product managers is, you know, your job number one is risk management. And what I mean risk management is someone is writing a check for all this work, right? Am I spending $1 million to do something cool that's going to give me a return on investment? Or am I spending $1 million and it flops and we all end up going out of the business? Someone is going to manage that risk. The CEO and the executives at the business are 100% focused on today's current business. All right, what are we doing? You know, what are my profit models? You know, what are my sales models? Hey, we might need to do something new, but they aren't going to go spend the time to do the research to develop a new product. What they are going to do is hire you and get you focused on that. But their expectation of what you give them back is you're managing the risk. You're being a good steward. So that's one role that is super important for a product manager. The second component of it is the customer expert. You're going to hear me use the word customer a lot today. From a philosophy standpoint, from a value standpoint, and from a business standpoint, customers are the only thing that matters. I've given that advice to many of my direct reports, many people that I've mentored. Regardless of what you are trying to do in business, you have to recognize that you're in service of somebody else's needs, period. And I don't care if you're washing cars or you're building apps, there is someone you are trying to solve a problem for, and you got to care more about their problems than they do sometimes. It's super important. And that's mainly the main two focuses for a product manager. You will hear people use phrases like the product manager is the CEO of the product or the CEO of the startup. In the real world, no. It sounds great in TED Talks and on YouTube videos, but in reality, what you are is the central location, the central hub for a lot of information and a lot of things that are valuable. People are going to come to you for more information. People are going to ask questions. People are going to hold you accountable for things. But make no mistake, the CEO is the CEO. At any day, he can walk in and say, you know what, this project sucks, goodbye. So don't get cocky with the title, even though, you know, it comes with a reasonable check and it comes with a reasonable amount of power. When you start buying into that whole CEO of the product deal, you're going to find yourself in some trouble quickly. All right. So when we talk about titles and how often you're going to hear different variations of these titles, I just pulled a few off the net. But effectively, these are all the same deals. They may focus on different areas, and it depends on what the company's strategies are. And a lot of this focus, I think when you read about this stuff and you research it, a lot of the complexity comes from a few things. It comes from different companies have different ways of doing things, so they're going to have different titles, they have different organizational structures, they have different ways they want to build teams, and they have different talent. And a lot of times, more often than not, people will map the title to a role, not necessarily to a skill set. So someone will have a title that says product manager, but effectively that might be a UX designer. You know what I mean? And it's, you know, over time it just kind of overlaps. But, you know, in the real world, and depending on the size of the company, whether or not it's a technology company or not, you're going to wear all of these hats. At one point, you know, I think at one point I was executive vice president of products, but also a product owner for our mainline product, which is weird. So all of the product managers reported to me, but I was also solely responsible for the company's most important product at the same time. So I wore two hats. But in the real world, you know, you're going to be doing all these things. This is it's not talked about as much. It's really popular right now. It's odd for me, like, you know, 5 years ago, hearing the word product manager just didn't come up. It was a title, but I didn't see a whole lot of stuff on Indeed or LinkedIn about it, but now it's like everywhere. It's classes, there's all sorts of shenanigans going on. Did I skip one? All right, responsibilities. Setting strategy, defining releases, evaluating ideas, prioritizing features. In this particular chair, the reason we talk about strategy so much is it's a leadership role, right? So effectively, you need to be able to talk to upper level management about what you're doing and why. But you also need to talk to your team and provide leadership to your team so your engineers know what you're building and why you're building it. Your UX people know, why this is important, why it's valuable. Like you will spend so much time either writing emails or in meetings or in settings like this, convincing people that this is awesome and this is what we need to do and this is why we need to do it. It is a 100% leadership responsibility here. And when you talk strategy, that strategy is going to be market strategy, is going to be tactical, steps that the company needs to make. It's, what the customers are looking for, what the customer strategies are. But this is a kind of higher level role. So when you guys are ideating and thinking about your ideas, you're just kind of at the first step. Like as you get further along and you start building this thing, you start bringing people in and you got to sell them on this idea. Like your friends aren't just going to hop in because it's your idea again. Like you got to sell them on why this is valuable. And that's kind of the beginning steps of, product management. Why is this thing going so much? All right, so the next step in our story, so the CEO has said, all right, well, we need you to go build something. You aren't going to be able to do this alone, so you need to build your team. First thing you're going to do is get you a project manager. These are not, people very often try to switch these two things out. They are not interchangeable at all. One is basically the higher level strategy guy, and the project manager is the implementer. The project manager is like, all right, well, here are the 20 things we need to get done. Let me create tasks for them. Let me assign resources to them. Let me assign dates to them. Let me get commitments from people on when they're going to have things back to me. Like that person is day to day on the emails or in a meeting working through the process while the product manager is doing other things. But this person is making sure that when that deadline says we need to launch October 1st, that we hit October 1st, come hell or high water. UX designer. This is a new fancy word. I think as I kind of track back on when I start hearing the word most, it is probably, and again, I'm old, it is when Apple got a lot better at developing visual, touchable, well-designed products. Everyone started copying, I want to say probably not the iMac, probably the third iteration of the iPod, and then like the new the new Macs at that point, it just got smoother and sleeker. The iPhones got beautiful. Like there was a complete push, and design became the most important thing. Everyone wanted to be a designer. Everyone wanted to focus on design. Every company, no matter how raggedy their product was trying to figure out how they can get a designer involved, because the belief was that if it looked cool, it would sell. That is not at all what design is, which we'll get to. But that is why the term is very, very popular and why you see it everywhere. It is the marketing around this idea that if things look beautiful, people will buy them. If you take a look at the actual roles and responsibilities, when I talk about overlap, here again is overlap. Again, this is a team member on your product team, but they claim to do product research, which you would do. They claim to be creating personas and scenarios, which you would do. Competitor analysis is yours. Customer analysis and user research is yours. And we could go down the line, but again, because of these titles and the way they're designed, these things kind of overlap. Effectively, what would happen in the real world is if you are lucky enough, and I will say lucky because this role is like a unicorn, if you are lucky enough to have an experienced UX designer on your team, basically they'll sit in on all your calls with the clients. They aren't responsible for this thing, but what you'll do is you don't want to create a gap where you are talking to customers, talking to clients, and then feeding this information back to the team, which feeds back to someone else, which feeds back to someone else. That is a recipe for disaster in terms of that information gap. So you start inviting your product team to the calls. And what happens is they'll start getting this information directly. Would they be responsible for it? No. But again, this position unless you're in Silicon Valley and you are working at Google and a number of other high-end technology companies, it's very rare that you see a UX designer that actually has this as their roles and responsibility. Usually it's tied into something else. All right, so the engineers. I don't know how many engineers we have in a room, but these are your developer team members. I am oversimplifying this and just saying full stack. Again, the full stack developer is a unicorn. In the real world, usually engineering skills are broken down into categories. You know, you have back-end people, you have front-end people, you have people that specialize in apps, you have people that specialize in websites. Like this is it is rare to find someone that is a full-stack developer and good. And I am saying that even though I have full-stack developer in my resume as well. The reality is people pick their specializations, right? You know, I like databases and I like the front end. I couldn't comfortably try to pitch myself as a full stack developer because I like the front end more than I like the back end, and that's usually how it works out in this space. You have people with roles like some people will be like your web front end. You have testers, which we'll talk about in a second. There's a bunch of engineers, or there'll be an engineering team or a development team that are working on different tasks based on what you are requesting. I am using a full stack developer to intentionally oversimplify this, but this could just as well be your development team. All right, I kind of covered this. You'll also notice that the full stack developer includes UX design, project management, and a couple other things. So again, it's overlap. Any questions so far? All right. Like I think I've already kind of explained this, the front end versus the back end. The easiest way to understand it, or the easiest way to explain it, is the front end is typically what you see when you start talking about user experience, or the UI. That is the front end. The things that make that information available, or that do the number crunching in the background, or will pull information from the database, that's the back end stuff. QA engineers. In a perfect world, if you're building a product that is worth using, you have a QA engineer. That QA engineer's sole responsibility is to find out what the programmer is doing wrong. And it sounds contentious because it is, but it is intentional. And it is a part of a well-designed team. If you are putting together some type of, if you're putting together some type of startup or some idea and you want to build this and you're going to take the entrepreneurial route and you're thinking you need one developer, probably need two. And the reason that is when developers are usually building products, they are solely focused on just getting the lights to come on, right? Like I want to get this thing to work. They aren't looking for efficiency. They aren't necessarily building out this is the best way to do it. They aren't double checking whether or not the inputs and outputs are going to work correctly. Really what they're just trying to confirm is that, all right, well, when I hit this button, it does something. It is just like the real world. You don't have someone checking their work. This QA engineer's sole job is to figure out how to break the product. All day, every day, they sit at their desk figuring out, all right, well, if I give it this information, what is it going to do? If I give it this information, what it's going to do? And if you are building anything, especially if you are trying to sell it to a corporation, B2B, you need to have someone that's covering those items, because that's going to be the person that saves you from yourself. Because very often, again, we get happy that it works, we get happy that it looks good, and we push it out, we start trying to sell it, and no one has identified that, all right, well, this thing is going super duper wrong. One of the first companies that I worked at, when I came on board as a product manager there, they didn't have a product team. They were just a ragtag group of engineers is what I refer to them as. Like, these guys would spend their day talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and then at some point, like, the code would appear in the middle of the night, and then I'd get tickets that things were complete, but they didn't have a whole lot of process. And one of the first things that I identified is when I would go in as a product manager and do my testing, the features would be complete, but they never worked. And what we came to realize as I analyzed it is they were so caught into, all right, I press this button, and what would happen in a development process? It's, I do the work, I check it into the system to say that it's complete, and then someone else technically should push it to the mainline code, and then they compile it, and all right, out pops a working app. What was happening was everybody was loading it in. No one was doing the work of, all right, well, let me incorporate this into the larger code and then test again to figure out whether or not it'll work. So it was like, my piece works, but you're working with 50 other developers, right? So once you put it into the mainline code, it stopped working because something somewhere else broke it. And it's like, all right, well, from their standpoint, it's done. No one was doing integration testing. No one was getting everything in and saying, hey, once it actually gets back into the mainline code, it works. And this is what your QA engineer actually focuses on all day, every day. You have to have these people. This is go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I was
Sure.
going to you. So I was going to just ask, before you moved on to your next slide, was a product manager versus a systems analyst. Are they, because to me they sound very similar. The only difference is maybe the product manager owns that project, not project, but that product and the responsibility. Is that the difference between a systems analyst and a product manager?
It depends on the situation. Usually when you see a systems analyst, it is a product that is already developed. It's over a period of time. They aren't customer facing. They aren't adding new features. They may be designing stuff internally. And that person may be responsible for architecting that piece of it. Usually if it is something that is outwardly facing and there's customers involved, you're going to have a product person, because what you really don't want to have is your software engineer talking to clients. That's going to get ugly very quickly. Any other questions?
I was just going to ask, what does QA stand for?
Quality assurance. Sorry. Anybody else? All right, some more duties for your QA person. I kind of talked to this. This is a very specific personality, and it's QA people have saved my life a few times, so you're never going to hear me say anything negative about them. All right, so we're going to start our journey. All right, so I figured in order to make this thing interesting, I would basically create 3 characters. And these characters are going to be supplemented through, like, I'm going to call them the 6 wise men. They are basically people that are experts in this particular field, well known in these particular areas, that you're going to see quotes from, both in at the end of the deck, but also throughout the deck. But these are people that are very good in these particular areas. You're going to be familiar with the builders. Maybe the designers, probably not the discoverers at all, but I will tell you that customer development is the most important piece, and these discoverers are relevant in a lot of different ways. So here are our discoverers. Eric Ries wrote a book, I want to say a number of years ago, called A Lean Startup. And basically what he kind of did was built off the work of Steve Blank, who also wrote a book called I want to say The Epiphany of something. But basically, Steve Blank is the one that kind of developed this whole customer development model. And you'll see more about this going on. But basically, the way of understanding it is that a lot of people seem to believe that a startup is like a formulated business, and it's not. A startup is an organization designed to figure out what can become a business. And those two things are very, very different. And again, it's like when I said at the beginning, people have their ideas. My idea is going to be cool. My idea is going to be great. We're just going to run with it. That's the exact opposite of the way it's supposed to work. And people do it all the time. So a few years back, I think probably in my last executive role, we were acquiring companies. And a lot of my job as the leadership of the product team was when we bought a company, I would analyze the software investments and intellectual property of whatever company we purchased. The last company that we purchased at that point, I started digging through their mainline product, and I know for a fact they probably got between $5 to $9 million in the sale process purely because of this product. So, the intent was, all right, well, we're going to buy it, we're going to rebrand it, we're going to spin it into our product, and it's going to be awesome. And I started digging into it, and we start coming into all sorts of problems. The first thing we realized is that no one had really tracked the amount of money that had been spent on this product. When I finished my analysis, I think over a 4-year period, we'd spent $10 million building a product, and we had 0 customers. We literally could not give it away. At one point, I tried to package it into a product package for a sale for Walmart, and they said no thanks. So literally, I couldn't give it away, but someone had spent $10 million. And as we dug through it, really what we found out is the owner's son thought it was a cool idea, and they started building it, and they kept building it. And because he was the owner's son, nobody ever asked him any questions. Nobody ever asked him whether he talked to a customer, if customers wanted. They just believed him. And